The silence in first class wasn't one of peace. It was the sharp, cold silence of judgment. Aboard Aerovista Flight 710 to London, every passenger was a story. But flight attendant Brenda Perry was only interested in the cover, not the contents. She saw a black woman, poised and elegant, holding a simple woven leather purse. To Brenda it was an offense, a blemish in her perfectly curated world of luxury. She decided to make her disapproval known, sneering and mocking with the precision of a surgeon. But Brenda was about to learn a brutal lesson. Some books, when opened, reveal a story so powerful it can shatter your entire world. Aerovista Airline's first-class cabin on the flagship New York to London route was designed to be a sanctuary. It was a world of muted tones, brushed metal, and the gentle clinking of champagne flutes. For senior flight attendant Brenda Perry, it was more than a workplace. It was her stage. At 42, with a face held taut by ambition and a smile that never quite reached her eyes, Brenda saw herself as the gatekeeper of this exclusive club. She curated the experience, and in her mind, that included curating the passengers. Her gaze, sharp and evaluative, swept across the cabin. She noted the Patek Philippe on the wrist of the hedge fund manager in 2A, the quiet confidence of the diplomat in 3K, and the brand-new Louis Vuitton carry-on tucked beneath the feet of a young tech heiress. These were her people. They understood the language of luxury, the unspoken grammar of wealth. Then she saw the couple in 4D and 4F. The man, David Kensington, was dressed in a simple, dark grey cashmere sweater and worn-in jeans. He had a kind, unassuming face and was engrossed in a paperback novel. Brenda mentally catalogued him as new money, or perhaps a guest travelling on points, someone who didn't quite belong but had found a loophole. It was his wife, however, who drew Brenda's immediate and potent scorn. Dr. Lena Hughes was a woman of quiet, unshakable grace. Her hair was styled in intricate micro-braids, adorned with a few delicate silver rings that caught the soft cabin light. She wore a simple but elegant silk blouse and linen trousers. She was by any measure beautiful. But Brenda didn't see beauty. She saw a discrepancy. And that discrepancy was sitting on Lena's lap, her purse. It was not a Birkin. It was not a Chanel 255. It wasn't even a recognizable high-end brand like a Loewe or a Bottega Veneta. It was a tote bag exquisitely crafted from woven strips of deep brown and black leather with a unique geometric pattern. The leather was supple, the stitching was perfect, but it bore no logo. It was anonymous. To Brenda, anonymity was a sin. It suggested a lack of status, an ignorance of the rules. In her world, if you could afford a $10,000 plane ticket, you could afford a handbag that announced it. Brenda began her performance. As she walked by, she let her eyes linger on the bag for a fraction of a second too long, her lip curling in a barely perceptible sneer. She leaned towards her junior colleague, a nervous young woman named Tiffany, and whispered just loud enough for Lena to potentially overhear. "See, Tiffany, this is what happens when the airline runs promotions. The standards just slip." Tiffany flushed, glancing nervously at Lena, who gave no indication she had heard. Lena was calmly reading through a sheaf of papers filled with complex equations and charts. Her focus was absolute. Brenda took their pre-departure drink orders. She was effusive with the man in 2A. "Mr. Henderson, of course, the 98. Dom Perignon for you." "An excellent choice. It's drinking beautifully tonight." When she reached Lena and David, her tone shifted. It became flat, perfunctory. "Can I get you something to drink? I'll have a sparkling water with lime. Please." Lena said, her voice warm and melodic, not looking up from her papers. "And for you, sir?" Brenda asked David. "The same will be fine, thank you," he replied, finally looking up from his book. His eyes were a startlingly clear blue, and they held a keen intelligence that made Brenda momentarily falter. She forced her professional smile back into place. Of course. Water, coming right up. As she prepared the drinks at the galley, she continued her lesson for Tiffany. You have to learn to read the signs, Brenda said, slicing a lime with unnecessary force. It's all about the details. The watch, the shoes, the handbag. They tell you who is important and who is just visiting. The water with lime crowd, she gestured vaguely towards Lena's seat, are usually the ones who will complain about the thread count of the blankets. They feel they have to prove they belong here. Tiffany nodded, though her discomfort was palpable. She seems very nice, though. Oh, they're always nice, Brenda scoffed, placing the 2 glasses of water on her tray with a dismissive thud. It's a cover for insecurity. Now watch and learn how to manage expectations. She approached their seats again. She placed David's water down perfectly on its coaster. But for Lena, she leaned over and placed the glass just off-center, close enough to the edge of the small table that a slight nudge would send it tumbling. It was a petty act of passive aggression, a tiny assertion of dominance. Lena, without missing a beat in her reading, simply reached out a slender hand and moved the glass to the center of the coaster, her focus never leaving the page. Brenda's smile tightened. This woman's composure was an affront. She was supposed to be flustered to feel out of place. Instead, she radiated an aura of such profound self-possession that it made Brenda's own carefully constructed identity feel fragile. The battle for the soul of the first-class cabin had begun, and Brenda was determined to win. She just didn't realize the war was already lost. As the aircraft reached its cruising altitude of 35,000 feet, the gentle hum of the Rolls-Royce Trent engines became a backdrop for the drama unfolding in the cabin. Brenda, feeling her initial jabs had failed to land, decided to escalate her campaign against Lena Hughes. It wouldn't be a single overt act of hostility. That would be unprofessional and could get her reprimanded. Instead, it would be a campaign of 1,000 tiny cuts, a death by microaggressions, each one designed to make Lena feel unwelcome and insignificant. The dinner service began. Brenda, with a flourish, presented the menus. To the other passengers, she offered detailed descriptions of the chef's specials, a collaboration with the Michelin-starred chef Daniel Hum. Mr. Henderson. She cooed to the man in 2A. The seared scallops with a cauliflower puree are simply divine. The chef sources the scallops directly from the Isle of Skye. They were swimming just yesterday. When she reached Lena, her voice lost all its warmth. The menu is in the folder. Let me know what you want. Lena looked up, her gaze steady. I'd love to hear about the specials if you don't mind. Brenda's eye twitched. They're all listed on the page. The beef, the fish, or the pasta. David put his book down. The flight attendant for Mr. Henderson seemed to have a bit more information. He said, his tone mild, but with an underlying firmness. Are there different menus? Brenda was momentarily thrown. She hadn't expected him to speak up. No, sir, of course not. I was just trying to be efficient. She then recited the description of the scallops in a rushed, monotone voice, stripping the words of their appeal. The scallops sound wonderful. I'll have those, please, Lena said, unfazed. I'll have the beef, David added. As Brenda collected the menus, her hand, accidentally, brushed against Lena's woven purse, which was now sitting on the empty seat between her and David. She recoiled with theatrical disgust. Oh, goodness, she said loud enough for the surrounding passengers to hear. Ma'am, would you mind stowing your bag? It could be a hazard. We need to keep the aisles clear, even though this isn't an aisle. The logic was nonsensical, but the intent was clear. Lena looked at the bag, then back at Brenda. "It's on an empty seat and it's well away from the aisle. Is there a specific rule I'm not aware of?" "Company policy." Brenda lied smoothly. "We need all items to be in the overhead compartment or under the seat in front of you." She gestured to the empty space under the ottoman. "You can probably squeeze it down there." The implication was clear. Your bag belongs on the floor. Before Lena could respond, David spoke. "That won't be necessary. It's not in anyone's way, and it will remain there. If you can show me the specific regulation in your manual, I'd be happy to comply. Otherwise, please continue with the dinner service." His voice was still quiet, but it now held a note of command that was unmistakable. Brenda felt a flash of anger. Who did this man in his casual sweater think he was? She gave a tight, resentful nod. "As you wish, sir." The meal was served, while others received their plates with grace and a bon appétit. Lena's plate was placed before her with a clatter. A small dollop of the cauliflower puree sloshed onto the pristine white tablecloth. "Oh, clumsy me," Brenda said, her voice laced with false sincerity. She made a half-hearted dab at the stain with a napkin, succeeding only in smearing it. It's so hard to balance things properly sometimes. Throughout the meal, Brenda's neglect was palpable. Lena's water glass remained empty, while the champagne flutes around her were topped up with diligent care. When Lena requested a blanket, Brenda returned with a thin, scratchy one from the Economy Plus section, claiming the first-class cashmere blankets were all in use. A blatant lie. Lena remained a pillar of composure. She ate her meal with quiet enjoyment, read her papers, and occasionally shared a soft-spoken word with her husband. Her refusal to be rattled seemed to infuriate Brenda even more. This wasn't how the script was supposed to go. The imposter was supposed to crumble to show some sign of distress to validate Brenda's judgment. The final most egregious act came during the dessert service. Tiffany, the junior attendant, was serving a rich chocolate lava cake. As she carefully passed a plate to Lena, Brenda, coming up the aisle from behind, stumbled, jostling Tiffany's arm. The small pitcher of hot fudge sauce accompanying the cake tipped over, cascading down the front of Lena's silk blouse and onto her precious research papers. A collective gasp went through the nearby seats. "Oh my word, Tiffany, look what you've done!" Brenda exclaimed, immediately shifting the blame. "You have to be so much more careful. I am so sorry, Mom," she said to Lena, her voice dripping with the most insincere apology Lena had ever heard. Tiffany stood frozen, her face pale with shock and shame. She knew Brenda had bumped her intentionally. Lena looked down at the dark, sticky mess soaking into her blouse and, more importantly, smudging the ink on her meticulously prepared notes. For the first time, a flicker of genuine distress crossed her features. Those weren't just papers. They were the culmination of 6 months of research for a presentation she was due to give at a major astrophysics conference at Oxford. "These notes," Lena whispered, trying to blot the sticky sauce with a napkin. David Kensington placed a calming hand on her arm. He looked at the mess at his wife's distressed face, and then his gaze lifted. He looked past the flustered Tiffany and settled on Brenda. The temperature in the cabin seemed to drop by 20 degrees. His blue eyes, once calm and observant, were now chips of ice. The unassuming man in the cashmere sweater was gone. In his place was someone else, entirely. Someone who had been pushed too far. "Enough," David said. The single word cut through the air with the finality of a guillotine. Brenda, still in the midst of her performance of fake concern, stopped short. She looked at David, a smirk still playing on her lips. "I agree, sir. This is completely unacceptable. Tiffany will certainly be hearing about this." No, David said, his voice dangerously low. I wasn't talking to her. I was talking to you. He slowly folded his book, placing it on the table with deliberate precision. You will be hearing about this. You, your supervisor's supervisor, and the entire board of this airline. Brenda's smirk faltered. A sliver of uncertainty pierced her smugness. I'm not sure I understand, sir. It was an accident. There have been no accidents here, David said, his eyes locking onto hers. Only a series of deliberate, unprofessional, and frankly disgusting acts of prejudice. And I have been documenting every single one of them for the last 3 hours. He reached into his carry-on bag, the one Brenda had mentally dismissed as nondescript, and pulled out a small leather-bound notebook. It's all here. The whispers, the comments about our drink order, the hazard claim about the purse, the inferior blanket, the empty water glass, and now this. He gestured to the mess. This pathetic, transparently malicious final act. The cabin was now utterly silent. Everyone was watching. Brenda felt a cold dread begin to creep up her spine. This was not the reaction of a man on a rewards ticket. This was something else. But her arrogance was a fortress not easily breached. Sir, with all due respect, she began, her voice taking on a haughty defensive tone. You have no idea who you're talking to. I am the senior attendant on this flight. I run this cabin. You and your wife, with her little craft fare bag, clearly don't understand the standards we maintain at Aerovista. It was a fatal miscalculation. She had insulted the purse one last time. David Kensington smiled, but it was a terrifying sight, devoid of all warmth. You're right about one thing. I clearly don't understand the standards you maintain. Because if this is the standard, then my airline is in far more trouble than I ever imagined. He paused, letting the words hang in the air. You run this cabin, you say? Well, I'm David Kensington, and I run this airline. The name hung in the air, thick and heavy with consequence. David Kensington. For most passengers, the name meant nothing. But for anyone who worked for Aerovista Airlines, it was a name spoken with a mixture of reverence and fear. David Kensington wasn't just a CEO. He was the CEO. The reclusive, almost mythical figure who had taken over the airline 2 years prior and initiated a ruthless top-to-bottom overhaul. He was known for his incognito flights, his obsession with operational detail, and his zero-tolerance policy for mediocrity. He was a ghost in the machine, and Brenda had just spent 3 hours trying to exorcise him. Brenda's mind reeled frantically, trying to process the information. It was impossible. A joke, a bluff. The CEO of a multi-billion-dollar international airline wouldn't be dressed in a simple sweater and jeans. He wouldn't be sitting quietly in row 4. He would be in a private jet, or at the very least in seat 1A, surrounded by a deferential entourage. She let out a short, sharp laugh, a sound brittle with disbelief. Right, and I'm the Queen of England. Sir, I think you've had enough to drink, even if it was just water. But the man in 2A, Mr. Henderson, the hedge fund manager Brenda had been fawning over, slowly lowered his glass of champagne. His eyes were wide. He leaned forward slightly. My God! Henderson breathed, his voice a low murmur that carried in the stunned silence. It is him, David Kensington. We were on a panel together at the Davos summit last year. The confirmation hit Brenda like a physical blow. The air rushed from her lungs. The blood drained from her face, leaving behind a sickly, pale mask. Her carefully constructed reality, her entire sense of self-worth, built on judging others, shattered into 1,000,000 pieces. The floor of the first-class cabin, her kingdom, suddenly felt like it was plummeting through the sky. She stared at David, truly seeing him for the first time. The unassuming clothes were a disguise. The quiet demeanor was not weakness, but observation. The paperback novel was a prop. She looked at his wife, Dr. Lena Hughes, who was now calmly gathering her stained papers with a quiet dignity that seemed in this moment more regal than any monarch. The woman she had dismissed as an insecure outsider suddenly looked like the most powerful person in the room. And the purse. Oh God, the purse. Brenda's eyes darted to the woven leather bag on the seat, the bag she had mocked as a craft fair item, the symbol of everything she had deemed unworthy. That bag, David said, his voice cold, and even as if he were reading her thoughts, was a gift to my wife. It was handmade by a master craftsman in Ethiopia, a man whose family has worked with leather for over 500 years. Its value is not in a logo, but in its history, its artistry, and the fact that my wife loves it. Something you, with your shallow obsession with brand names, could never possibly comprehend. He then turned his attention to Lena. "Are you all right, my love?" he asked, his voice now filled with a gentle concern that was a stark contrast to the icy fury he had directed at Brenda. "I'm fine, David," Lena said softly, "but my notes for the Oxford presentation are ruined." David's jaw tightened. He looked back at Brenda, whose face was now a rictus of terror. "This presentation is for the Royal Astronomical Society. My wife, Dr. Lena Hughes, is one of the world's leading theoretical astrophysicists. Her work is funded by grants from 3 governments and the Peterson Institute. The notes you just helped destroy represent hundreds of hours of work that is, without exaggeration, fundamentally important to our understanding of the universe." He let that sink in. The diplomat in 3K, who had been watching the exchange with keen interest, slowly began to applaud. Soon another passenger joined in, and then another. It wasn't loud or boisterous, but a quiet, rolling wave of support for the wronged couple and condemnation for the flight attendant. Brenda stood frozen in the aisle, the applause washing over her like acid. Her world had not just collapsed, it had been inverted. She, the arbiter of class, was the one being judged and found wanting by the very people whose approval she craved. David pressed the call button. Not the regular one, but a small, discreet button that sent a direct signal to the flight purser's private monitor. Seconds later, a distinguished grey-haired man named George Miller hurried into the cabin, his face etched with concern. "Mr. Kensington, is everything all right?" George said, his immediate recognition of David confirming the terrible truth for Brenda. "No, George, it is not," David said calmly. "There has been an incident. I need you to relieve Ms. Perry of her duties for the remainder of this flight. Immediately. She is to remain in the galley and have no further contact with any passengers. Is that understood?" George's professional gaze took in the scene, the mess on Lena's blouse, the ruined papers, Brenda's ashen face, and the icy fury in his CEO's eyes. "Understood completely, sir. My apologies for this unacceptable lapse in service." He turned to Brenda. His voice was low but firm. "Brenda, the galley. Now." Brenda couldn't move. Her feet felt like they were nailed to the floor. All she could do was stammer, but it was Tiffany. "Do not," David cut in his voice, dropping to a near whisper that was more menacing than any shout. "Attempt to blame your junior colleague for your own venom. I watched you. I saw you bump her arm. It was deliberate, just like everything else you've done tonight." Tiffany, who had been standing by, trembling, finally found her voice. "It's true, George," she said, tears welling in her eyes. "She did. She pushed my arm. That was the final nail in the coffin." George took Brenda firmly by the elbow. "Let's go, Brenda." As he led the utterly broken flight attendant away, A single, mortifying sob escaped her lips. The sound was swallowed by the hum of the engines. The Queen had been deposed her reign over the gilded cage of first class, ending not with a bang, but with a pathetic, whimpering retreat. The remainder of the flight to London was like a journey through a different dimension. For Brenda Perry, the galley, once her backstage area for gossip and preparation, became a prison cell. George Miller had been explicit in his instructions. She was not to leave the small enclosed space. She was to speak to no one. Tiffany and another flight attendant were brought in from business class to cover the first-class service. Brenda slumped onto the small jump seat, the metallic chill of the wall seeping into her back. The adrenaline of the confrontation had evaporated, leaving behind a cold, nauseating dread. She could hear the muffled sounds of the cabin beyond the curtain, the gentle clinking of cutlery as dessert was reserved, the low murmur of conversation, the occasional burst of laughter. It was her world, her stage, and she had been violently ejected from it. Her mind replayed the scene on a torturous loop. David Kensington's face transforming from unassuming to terrifying. The applause, George's grip on her arm. Dr. Lena Hughes, theoretical astrophysicist. The words mocked her. She had built her entire identity around her supposed ability to read people, to discern their value in a single glance. And she had never been more wrong. Her finely tuned social radar was, in fact, a blunt instrument of crude prejudice. She thought of her life outside the uniform. Her apartment, mortgaged to the hilt, was filled with imitation luxury inspired by handbags, cubic zirconia, that she passed off as diamonds, and furniture bought on a payment plan she could barely afford. Her Instagram account with the handle Brenda's Jet Set Life was a carefully curated fantasy of layovers in exotic locations, all filtered to look more glamorous than they were. The job at Aerovista was the sole pillar supporting this fragile facade. It gave her access proximity to the wealth and status she so desperately craved. Now that pillar was crumbling. Meanwhile, in the main cabin, George Miller was in full damage control mode. He personally attended to Lena and David. He brought a first aid kit with a special stain remover for Lena's blouse and a bowl of warm water. He provided a fresh set of cashmere pajamas and offered to have her clothes professionally cleaned and delivered to their hotel upon arrival. Dr. Hughes, Mr. Kensington, on behalf of Aerovista. I am profoundly sorry. George said, his voice filled with genuine remorse. There is no excuse for this behavior. It is anathema to everything we stand for. Thank you, George, Lena said graciously. It's not your fault. The fault lies with a broken culture that I have evidently failed to fix. David countered, his voice grim. This isn't about one bad employee, George. This is about a system that allows someone like her to reach a senior position. How many passengers has she treated this way? How many who didn't happen to be married to the CEO? How many complaints have been filed and ignored? George looked uncomfortable. Sir, I can't speak to that directly, but I assure you, a full and thorough investigation will be launched the moment we land. You're damn right it will, David said. And it will start with you. I want a full report of every formal and informal complaint ever lodged against Brenda Perry on my desk by the end of the day tomorrow. I want to know who handled them and what the resolution was. I want to know who promoted her. I want to know everything. George nodded, his face pale. Yes, sir. David then turned to Tiffany, who was tentatively offering Lena a new dessert. Young lady, what is your name? Tiffany Wright, sir, she stammered. Tiffany, you were placed in an impossible position tonight. I saw your discomfort. You were professional, even when your superior was not. Your honesty when it mattered is noted and appreciated. Don't worry about your job. You have nothing to fear." Tears of relief streamed down Tiffany's face. "Thank you, sir. Thank you." The rest of the flight passed in a haze of surreal calm. As they began their final descent into Heathrow, the fasten seatbelt sign chimed. In the galley, the sound made Brenda flinch. For her, the descent was not just from 35,000 feet, but from the precarious heights of her own delusion. When the plane finally docked at the gate at Terminal 3, a special protocol was enacted. A black car was waiting on the tarmac for David and Lena, allowing them to deplane privately. Before they left, David had one last word with George. "Make sure she is escorted from the airport by security. She is not to represent this airline in public for one more second. She is suspended effective immediately pending termination." Brenda watched through the small galley window as David Kensington helped his wife, now dressed in a comfortable airline sweater, down the mobile stairs and into the waiting Jaguar. She watched the car pull away across the vast, rain-slicked tarmac. The woman with the craft fare bag was being chauffeured away like royalty, while she, Brenda Perry, the self-proclaimed queen of the cabin, was about to be escorted out like a criminal. A few minutes later, 2 stern-faced airport security officers and an Aerovista ground manager appeared at the galley door. "Brenda Perry?" The manager asked, his voice devoid of sympathy. "Please gather your belongings. These gentlemen will escort you." As she was walked through the crew corridors of Heathrow away from the public eye, her uniform suddenly felt like a costume of shame. The wings pinned to her lapel, once a source of immense pride, felt as heavy as lead. The long, sterile hallway stretched out before her, a perfect metaphor for the bleak, uncertain future that awaited her. The descent was over, but she had a terrible feeling she had not yet hit the ground. The moment Brenda Perry was escorted out of Heathrow, the gears of the corporate machine at Aerovista began to grind with terrifying efficiency. David Kensington was not a man for half measures. His fury, born from the disrespect shown to his wife, had broadened into a systemic inquiry. Brenda's case was no longer just about a single incident. It had become a referendum on the airline's culture. The first domino to fall was an email sent from David's personal account at 6:05 a.m. London time to the entire executive board and the head of Global Human Resources, a formidable woman named Janet Cole. The subject line was a single ominous word, urgent. The email briefly detailed the events on Flight 710 and concluded with a directive: "I want a complete audit of the performance complaint history and promotion track of senior flight attendant Brenda Perry. I also want a full review of the complaint resolution process within the in-flight services division. I expect a preliminary report by close of business today. No excuses." In the New York headquarters, panic ensued. Janet Cole, known for her surgical precision in corporate matters, immediately sequestered a team of HR analysts and internal investigators. They were tasked with digging into every digital file, every paper record associated with Brenda Perry. What they found was not a surprise, but a confirmation of a deeply flawed system. Over her 12-year career, Brenda Perry had accumulated a shocking number of passenger complaints. There were 17 formal complaints in total, a number that should have triggered a mandatory review years ago. They ranged from rude and dismissive attitude to more specific allegations of discriminatory behavior. A complaint from 3 years prior, filed by a wealthy Nigerian businessman, stated she had loudly questioned the authenticity of his credit card when he tried to purchase duty-free items. Another, from an elderly couple traveling on their life savings, claimed she had mocked their simple clothing and made them feel like beggars in the business-class cabin. The pattern was undeniable. Brenda targeted anyone she perceived as not fitting her narrow, brand-obsessed definition of wealth and status, with a particular venom reserved for people of color. the investigators discovered why nothing had been done. All 17 complaints had been routed to the same mid-level manager in in-flight services, a man named Frank Miller, no relation to George the purser. Frank was a complacent box-ticking bureaucrat, a friend of Brenda's who saw his job as protecting his staff rather than upholding company standards. His response to each complaint was identical: a canned apology email sent to the passenger, and a note in Brenda's file that read, "Addressed with employee. No further action needed." He had never once conducted a proper interview or sought corroborating evidence. He was the firewall that allowed Brenda's toxic behavior to flourish. Janet Cole's team compiled the report. It was a damning indictment not just of Brenda, but of Frank Miller and the entire divisional oversight. They attached digital copies of all 17 complaints, Frank's dismissive responses, and a summary of Brenda's social media activity, which painted a picture of an employee dangerously obsessed with a materialistic fantasy at odds with the airline's values of service and respect. Meanwhile, Brenda was in a state of self-imposed exile in her meticulously decorated but financially draining apartment. Her suspension notice had arrived via courier, a cold corporate document informing her that she was not to contact any Aerovista employees or access company property. Her world had shrunk to the four walls of her living room. At first she was defiant. She called Frank Miller her protector. "Frank, you have to fix this," she screeched into the phone. "This is insane." It was a misunderstanding. That man is on a power trip. Frank, however, had just come from a grueling, sweat-drenched meeting with Janet Cole's investigators. He knew the game was up. "Brenda, I can't," he stammered, his voice weak. "They know everything. They have all the files. They asked me about the complaint from Mr. Adebayo, the one from 2022. They asked about all of them." "So what?" "You handled them," Brenda insisted. "That's the problem, Brenda. I handled them." He said the word dripping with regret. "They're looking at me now, too. I have to go." He hung up, leaving Brenda listening to the dial tone. Her defiance began to curdle into panic. She turned to the one place she felt she had control: her social media. She decided to get ahead of the story. She would frame herself as the victim. She typed out a vague, self-pitying post on Instagram, setting it against a filtered photo of a sunset from a previous trip. "Sometimes you can be punished for just doing your job," she wrote. "It's a tough world when people in power can crush the little guy. Praying for strength during this challenging time." Flight attendant life. Justice for workers. Corporate bullying. It was a catastrophic mistake. The story of what happened on Flight 710 had already started to leak, not from David or Lena, who maintained a dignified silence, but from other passengers. Mr. Henderson, the hedge fund manager, had recounted the entire tale to a colleague who told another, and soon the story was whispered through the elite financial circles of London and New York. The diplomat in 3K mentioned it to a well-connected journalist friend at a dinner party. By the time Brenda's post went live, the context was already known in certain circles. Her attempt to play the victim backfired spectacularly. An anonymous account, likely another airline employee who had long disliked her, commented, "Weren't you the one bullying a world-renowned astrophysicist and her CEO husband over a handbag?" The comment was like a spark on a trail of gasoline. The story exploded. Within hours it was on aviation blogs, then picked up by gossip websites, and finally major news outlets. They didn't have all the exact details, but the core narrative was there. Aerovista, flight attendant, fired after insulting CEO's wife. Brenda's Instagram was flooded. The sycophantic comments she was used to were replaced by a tsunami of outrage. People dug into her old posts, mocking her fake luxury lifestyle. The brands she had so proudly tagged in her photos were inundated with messages demanding they disavow her. A small jewelry company, whose bracelet she often wore, released a statement. "We are disgusted by the alleged behavior and want to clarify this individual was never an official ambassador for our brand." The karma was just beginning. It was not a single event, but a complex, interconnected architecture of consequences, each brick laid by her own arrogance. She had wanted to be seen to be noticed as a member of the elite. And now the whole world was looking at her not with admiration, but with utter contempt. The public unraveling of Brenda Perry was brutal and swift. In the digital age, shame is a spectator sport, and she had just become the star player. Her name, which the initial news reports had omitted, was quickly leaked by a disgruntled former colleague. Suddenly, Brenda Perry Aerovista was a trending search term. Her carefully curated Instagram became a digital pillory. People she didn't know left thousands of comments dissecting her life, mocking her posts and calling her out for her prejudice. She was forced to make her account private, but the screenshots were already everywhere. Aerovista's PR department, under direct orders from David, moved decisively. They issued a formal statement. It didn't name Brenda, but the message was unequivocal. Aerovista Airlines is aware of a recent in-flight incident involving unacceptable behavior from a crew member. The employee in question has been terminated effective immediately. This conduct is in direct violation of our core values of respect, dignity, and inclusivity. We have extended our deepest apologies to the affected passengers. Furthermore, we are initiating a company-wide review of our customer service training and complaint resolution protocols to ensure that such an event never happens again. The statement was praised for its swiftness and clarity. But for Brenda, the word terminated was a death sentence. It was followed by a formal letter from HR, which also informed her that, due to the nature of her dismissal for gross misconduct, she would be forfeiting her severance package and any accrued flight benefits. Simultaneously, Frank Miller, the manager who had enabled her for years, was also fired. His termination was quieter an internal matter, but the message within the company was seismic. The era of sweeping problems under the rug was over. Accountability was the new mandate. For Brenda, the consequences cascaded into every corner of her life. Losing her job meant losing the inflated salary that propped up her lifestyle. The first call came from the financing company for her designer look sofa. She had missed a payment. The second was from her credit card company, informing her that her $24,000 balance was now subject to a penalty interest rate. The landlord of her overpriced apartment building slid an eviction warning under her door for late rent. Her friends, the ones who had loved basking in the reflected glamour of her jet-set life, vanished. Calls went unanswered. Texts were left on read. The social circle she had built was as hollow as her inspired by handbags. She was alone, trapped in an apartment she could no longer afford, surrounded by objects that now seemed to mock her. Desperate, she tried to find another job. But the airline industry is a small world. Her name was now notorious. No legacy carrier would touch her. She applied to budget airlines and was summarily rejected. Her reputation had preceded her. She even tried applying for high-end retail jobs at the luxury boutiques she used to frequent, hoping her knowledge of brands would be an asset. In one particularly humiliating interview at a Chanel boutique on Madison Avenue, the hiring manager recognized her. "Wait a minute," the manager said, her eyes narrowing. "You're the Aerovista flight attendant. I read about you." The interview ended abruptly. The hard karma was not just about losing a job. It was about the complete and total demolition of the identity she had so carefully and dishonestly constructed. Stripped of her uniform, her title, and the stage of the first-class cabin, she was forced to confront the person she actually was, a deeply insecure woman whose cruelty was a shield for her own feelings of inadequacy. Weeks turned into months. Brenda sold her furniture and the fake jewelry to make ends meet. She lost her apartment and was forced to move into a tiny rundown studio in a distant, unfashionable suburb. Her new reality was a stark, brutal contrast to the world she had pretended to inhabit. Her daily commute was now a crowded public bus, not a flight to Paris. Her uniform was a polyester apron at a greasy spoon diner where she worked as a waitress, clearing tables for patrons who often treated her with the same casual dismissiveness she had once perfected. One afternoon, a well-dressed couple sat at one of her tables. The woman placed her handbag on the booth seat next to her. It was a beautiful, unique bag made of woven material with no discernible logo. It was not the same one, but it was similar in spirit, a piece of art, not a status symbol. Old instincts died hard. A sneer started to form on Brenda's lips before she caught her reflection in the diner's grimy window. She saw a tired, defeated woman in a stained apron. The sight was so pathetic, it broke something inside her. The last vestiges of her arrogance crumbled, replaced by a profound and hollow shame. She approached the table, picked up her notepad, and forced a smile that for the first time in years was not meant to convey superiority, but simple, weary service. "Welcome to the Corner Bistro," she said, her voice raspy. "Can I get you folks something to drink? Water? Maybe—" The cycle was complete. She had become one of the water with lime crowd she had so venomously despised. She was grounded in every sense of the word, forced to live a life devoid of glamour and artifice, a life where the only thing that mattered was getting through the day. While Brenda's world had shrunk to the grey confines of a diner, the ripples from her actions on Flight 710 were expanding outward from David Kensington and Lena Hughes, creating waves of profound and lasting change. The ugly incident, once a source of private pain and anger, was about to be reforged into a powerful catalyst. A few days later, in the quiet of their New York apartment overlooking Central Park, the city lights painting a soft glow on the walls, Lena was still processing the event. The public furor was dying down, but the emotional residue remained. "I keep thinking," she began, her voice soft, as she looked out the window, "about all the times something similar has happened. The security guard who followed me in a department store. The academic who assumed I was an assistant at a conference. Small things, the 1,000 cuts, as you called them. I never had the power to do anything but absorb them and move on." David came up behind her, placing his hands gently on her shoulders. "This time is different, Lena. This time we do. The question is, what does that look like? I can burn down the whole in-flight division, fire a dozen people. It would be easy. But I don't think that's the answer." "No," Lena agreed, turning to face him. "Fire doesn't cleanse. It just chars the earth. What you need is to change the soil to make it impossible for someone like Brenda to ever take root again." That conversation became the seed of the Trajectory Initiative. The name itself was Lena's idea, a nod to her own field of astrophysics, the science of changing a celestial body's course through a deliberate application of force. David, armed with this new purpose, convened an emergency meeting of the Aerovista Executive Board. He walked into the sterile, mahogany-paneled boardroom, the faces of his VPs a mixture of apprehension and curiosity. He didn't sit at the head of the table. Instead, he stood before them, his demeanor not of a vengeful emperor, but of a deeply disappointed leader. "For the past 48 hours, he began, his voice calm but resonating with authority, "our company has been a case study in corporate failure, not a financial failure, but a human one." The incident on Flight 710 wasn't an isolated event. It was a symptom of a disease we have allowed to fester in the dark, a culture of complacency and prejudice that values the superficial over the substantial. Today we turn on the lights. He outlined the initiative with relentless clarity. He announced the hiring of a top-tier DEI consulting firm, not for a one-day seminar, but to fundamentally rebuild their training from the ground up. Our crews will learn about unconscious bias, not from a PowerPoint slide, but through immersive scenario-based training. They will learn empathy, cultural competency, and the critical distinction between professional service and personal judgment. Next, he addressed the systemic failure. Effective immediately, we are implementing a new anonymous reporting system, the AeroVista Sentinel program, managed by an independent third-party ethics firm. There will be an ironclad guarantee of non-retaliation. Had a system like this existed, Tiffany Wright could have reported Brenda Perry's behavior long before it escalated. He looked directly at the head of in-flight services. And our promotions process is broken. We will no longer advance people based on seniority alone. From now on, promotions to senior roles will require a 360-degree review incorporating verifiable passenger feedback and, most importantly, confidential peer assessments. A Frank Miller will never again be in a position to shield a Brenda Perry in this company. We will reward integrity, not just longevity. Meanwhile, Lena found herself at a crossroads. She was inundated with interview requests from every major news network and publication. Initially, she refused them all. But as she read the online commentary, seeing the story twisted into a simple tale of a rich man defending his wife, she realized her silence was allowing others to control the narrative. She finally agreed to a single, long-form interview with a journalist renowned for her thoughtful, nuanced work. Sitting in her university office, surrounded by books on quantum mechanics and celestial charts, Lena steered the conversation away from the salacious details. The journalist asked about the purse. "It's funny the whole thing started because of a bag," Lena said with a wry smile. "But it's a perfect metaphor. Everyone carries invisible luggage, you see. Bags filled with their history, their education, their accomplishments, their identity. The problem arises when people only see the exterior, the handbag, and use it to make a snap judgment about the value of the person carrying it. Whether it's a flight attendant in first class or a professor in a university lecture hall, this kind of prejudice closes doors. My husband's position afforded me a swift resolution, but this happens every day to people who don't have a CEO to call on." She then deliberately named the artisan collective Fekat Artisans of Addis Ababa and spoke of their incredible heritage. The article published under the title Dr. Lena Hughes and the Invisible Luggage was a sensation. It sparked thoughtful discussions on news panels and social media. Lena received a tearful video call from the head of the Ethiopian collective, a woman named Abeba. "Dr. Hughes," Abeba said, her voice thick with emotion, "you did not just buy a purse. You have given our village, our families, a future. We have orders from all over the world. You have changed our trajectory." The positive karma flowed downward within AeroVista as well. Tiffany Wright was called into the New York headquarters. Terrified, she expected to be let go as a loose end. Instead, she found herself in Janet Cole's office, the formidable head of HR. "Ms. Wright." Janet began her tone professional. "Integrity is our most valuable asset. You demonstrated it under extreme professional and personal pressure. That is the definition of leadership." She slid a folder across the desk. "We would like to offer you a position in the next Purser in Training program. It's an accelerated track. We believe you represent the future of this airline." Tiffany stared at the folder, tears of disbelief and relief blurring her vision. 6 months later, David and Lena Kensington boarded a flight to Rome for a much-needed vacation. As they entered the jet bridge, a young flight attendant with bright, eager eyes greeted them. She didn't recognize them. "Welcome aboard," she said with a genuine smile. She noticed the new bag Lena was carrying, another stunning, unique piece from the Fekat collective. "That is a beautiful bag, Mum. Here, let me help you find a safe place for it in the overhead compartment so it doesn't get bumped or crushed." The gesture was simple, professional, and full of unsolicited respect. Lena caught David's eye. A quiet, knowing look passed between them. The soil had been changed. The story of Flight 710 had become more than a cautionary tale. It was now foundational myth, a story whose moral was woven into the very fabric of the new Aerovista. The trajectory had indeed been corrected, and that's where the story ends. It's a powerful reminder that the true measure of a person isn't found in the brands they wear or the status they project, but in their character and integrity. Brenda Perry's story is a stark illustration of how a life built on judging others can collapse under the weight of its own prejudice. The hard karma she faced wasn't just losing her job, it was losing the fantasy she had built her entire identity around. In contrast, Dr. Lena Hughes and David Kensington showed that true power lies not in asserting dominance, but in using moments of injustice to build something better and more equitable for everyone. If this story resonated with you, and you believe in the power of substance over superficiality, please take a moment to hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more dramatic, real-life stories. What did you think of the CEO's response? Let us know in the comments below. We read every single one. Thank you for listening.